This is a Massey Ferguson from 1952. It's developing 35 horsepower and it's a 4-cylinder diesel. A very popular tractor at the time. I don't know what's wrong with it. I suspect there are certain things wrong with it. I don't even know if it runs because I towed it over here. So we'll inspect it and we'll fix it. Before we give it a wrench, we're going to take the hood off and it's just held in place by 2 bolts. So here it is. The radiator looks a bit tacky, but we'll find that out soon, how bad it is. You can tell there's a lot of grease and dirty stuff on this engine. A lot of dust got collected over time, so I'm going to spray it with some cold degreaser first, and then we'll rinse it off with a high pressure hose. And I'm going to let it sit and dry for a while. I'm not going to annoy you too much with showing you how to rinse down an engine. But after that, we'll start looking at some more details on the engine, what is wrong with it. It's looking a bit better now, now that it's been cleaned up. However, I've spotted a few issues that I don't like too much, but let's go around and see what's wrong with it. So first let's check the oil, and then we'll check the cooling liquid, we'll put a battery in, and then we'll try to crank it up. So let's go. So we'll go and check the oil first and see how that looks like. Now, the oil on this one, it's pitch black, and that means it's been used, but it's not milky or there's no foam on it, so we know there is no water coming into the oil. So that's at least one good point. Anyhow, we'll change the oil and we'll change the oil filters. So now let's check the radiator and the cooling system. Now, that's dry, not good. So maybe we have a bad radiator or we have some other issues. So what we'll do is we'll going to fill it up and see what happens. It's leaking from the back. It almost looks like one of those little anti-frost plates got popped out, so we'll have to replace that. But let's see if we have other gaps or leaks on the engine, and that's why I expected, because the radiator was empty. So this is another anti-frost plate. I just cleaned it up a bit so you can see it, and these are little pieces of metal that have been inserted into the engine block, so in case there is frost and there's not sufficient cooling liquid on it, then it will pop out, and that's exactly what happened on the top of the cylinder head here. And here we're having the top of the cylinder head, and I noticed as well that there are cracks in it, and you can see it over here. See these cracks? So the cylinder head is cracked as well from the same frost damage. So we'll have to remove the cylinder head. This is the thermostat housing, and you can see the crack actually here. So we'll need to replace the water pump housing as well. It's cast iron, so you can't really fix it. And here we have the first fuel filter fitted to the gas tank, but somebody messed around with this as well, as you can see, and it's actually leaking diesel fuel. So I think they just put this in to hold it in place, so we'll have to fix that. So we don't really have good news for this Massey Ferguson. We've seen that the cylinder head is cracked, it has frost damage. We also noticed that some of the anti-frost plates have been popped out. The radiator leaks, and most likely as well the front of the water pump will have to be replaced. And the thermostat housing is cracked. So that's going to be a little bit of work. And I'm thinking not to do it or still to do it. But then again, we haven't started it up, so if it turns out that the injection system is faulty as well, then I might as well cancel the whole thing and just get rid of it. If not, then I might actually consider getting a new cylinder head and still fix it. So let's see. I'm going to put a battery in now and try to crank it up. It may not be that easy to crank it up, but we'll see. I don't know if it's going to work or not. You got to be careful with the Massey Fergusons from this age, because they have the positive side of the battery connected to the chassis, and the negative side is that goes to the starter. So it's a bit opposite than what you would expect in normal cars. You also might have to double check if it's a 12 volts or 6 volts electrical installation on the vehicle, but you can check it on the starter engine. Typically it's marked how many volts it is, or the dynamo. So I know this one is a 12 volts one because I just checked it. So let me put in the battery and then we'll try to crank it up and see how it goes. So that's hooked up. So let's see if we get it started. We got the battery connected. I'm going to put the brake up, you never know, and make sure it's in neutral. Otherwise you can't start these Fergusons. The fuel is open, so that should work. Give it a bit of throttle and we'll spray it. Let's cross our fingers. Well, that doesn't seem to work. Whoops, I see the starter is disconnected. Alright, let's hook that up and try again. Well, at least it rotates, but I don't hear much of ignition. Wow. That looks good. But I see the water coming out, but that was expected. But besides that, that seems to run well. Let's see if I can drive it back and forth. Yeah, that works. Right, okay. So that all seems to work, so that's good. So maybe I should still fix it. So I just need to do a few closer looks here and there, and then we'll make a decision. Here I see some more damage on frost plates, but that should be not that hard to fix. The exhaust looks good, although I see here a crack as well. It's a bit loose. So the cast iron manifold is damaged a bit, but that's just the corner here, so I can replace that. So that's not too bad. So that will be an easy fix. I also will probably change the water pump because that most likely will have damage as well, especially since we've seen a crack in the cylinder head, and the water pump housing over here is also cracked. And I'll change the radiator, and that probably should get it back on track. Now the total cost of that is always the question. Is it worthwhile to repair an old tractor like this? But yeah, it's like an old person, isn't it? I mean, is it worthwhile to fix old people? I think it is, because they are people. Well, for me, an old tractor is like an old person, and I think I'm going to fix it. It's older than me, quite a bit older than me actually, and that's why I think it's still worthwhile fixing it. A radiator probably runs around 200 euros, a water pump 70, then the thermostat housing probably another 70, so this is close to 400 euros. Then I need a new cylinder head, which is another 400, so that's probably about 400 euros roughly. So that brings the total up around 800 euros, and then a few smaller pieces. So I think this tractor can be back on track for something like 1,000 euros. So I think it's worthwhile doing it, and that's what I'm going to do. So I will move it inside the workshop and we'll start disassembling it. We're going to start by taking off the gas tank, and then we'll start taking off all the parts that have to go, like the radiator, the water pump, the curl of the exhaust manifold. We'll take off the starter engine. I just want to double check it. We'll take off the dynamo, because this is still a dynamo, and we check the brushes and see if it's still charging. And then we'll take off the cylinder head, and while we have the cylinder head off, we might as well replace the injectors. They are not expensive. They run around 35 euros a piece. So I already removed the radiator, and we removed the thermostat housing and the water pump. So now next is the removal of the head of the cylinder head. So first we remove the valve cover. It's just a few nuts here, 3 nuts, and then you typically can lift it off. You have to undo this. But once we've got that lifted off, then we'll remove the intake manifold, the injectors, and then we can finally remove the cylinder head. So let's try to get this one off and see how it goes. There we go. Well, the inside doesn't look too bad. It's a bit black, but then again, that's quite normal. So let's carry on and remove the intake manifold. So now we'll remove the exhaust manifold. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3 more bolts on the bottom you have to remove. I already did it. And then you should be able to lift it off gently. Make sure you don't drop it, because this is cast iron. And it looks like it's a bit clogged up here. A lot of carbon in it. And now we'll remove the intake manifold. I'm actually quite surprised that I can get these nuts off that easily of an old engine. You would expect it differently. Now these air filters are filled with oil. So that's what we call a wet filter. Alright. So that makes it a bit easier. And now we should be able to get it off. Those I probably won't need anymore. I'll put new ones up, but nevertheless I'll keep them on the side. So it's always good to use them once you order the new stuff, to make sure that they are exactly the same. So now we're going to remove the injectors, but first we need to remove the tubing here. So there's 2 tubes. There's the tubing that returns the excessive diesel back into the gas tank, and then you have the high pressure tubes which are coming from the injector pump. And I'm going to show you how to do that, because this is copper and it's very sensitive, so you can bend it and break it very easily, and then you have even more work, more expenses to fix it. So the way I'm doing this, I'm removing the bracket that holds the injector in place, and then I'm using 2 keys actually to undo it. So let me show you how I do that. Undo, first of all, the bracket that holds the injector in place. And then next is with 2 keys. With one, which is a 10, you can hold the nut, or it's an 11, sorry. You can hold the nut which is against the injector, and then with another key you can turn loose the fitting for the return tube. And that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, you risk of bending the tubes. Here you go. So now it's disconnected. We place it on the side, and the rest is for later. So now we're going to take the high pressure fuel feed off the injectors. And that isn't all that hard to do. That's the reason why I'm putting back up the clamps, because otherwise it will move too much. There we go. So now we are ready to dismantle the injectors, take them out, and then place them on a piece of cloth in the right sequence. So number 1, 2, 3, and 4. I always do it like this because I want to keep the same pieces in the same place. You'll see it at the same time once we're going to remove the the push rods that are underneath here, because this guy doesn't have a camshaft on the top. Those are push rods from the bottom, and I'm going to keep them in place like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I will lay them out like that, so when I put it all back together, everything comes back in the same place. So let's start to remove the injectors now. That should not be that difficult. That's one. And normally they should come out quite easily, but they don't always. So try. And as you can see, those injectors are, I mean, they are really dirty. Yeah? So next is to remove the tumbler axe, which is this axle here, which is holding the tumblers, which have been pushed up by the push rods, and then they depress the valves. So that's the first thing to do. It's only held in place, as far as I can see, with 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we'll make sure that we keep it in the same place. And this is a bit tight, but that's okay. That's better. There we go. But before I remove the head, I'm going to remove the push rods. Number 1, number 2, and I keep them in order. As I take them out, I line them up. These bolts can be very tough to get out, so if you only extend your key on one side, then you tend to bend it a bit, and then you may slip off. That's why I'm using 2 bars, and it's a bit easier to do like this. But those are tough, the thingies. As you can hear it, how tough they are. Now tighten the head back on afterwards is a different thing. There you have to go in a sequence, but this head is broken, it's destroyed, so it doesn't really matter how I really move it. Or remove it, so the sequence is not important. However, if you are having a head that you want to keep, or you have to remount afterwards, then it's better to follow the proper sequence. So here goes the last one. And now the head should be loose, and we should be able to lift it off. Okay, so lifting the head off is quite heavy, so I attached a rope to it so I can actually lift it, and I will stand on top of it, because otherwise I can't get it off. I'm a bit too short, or too old maybe. So here we go. All right. Just going to hold it like this. And now I can take it. Now guys, here it is. So this is the old head gasket that can go. I'm not going to throw it away because I might need it. I see this is a copper one. Pretty good shape actually. I'm just going to put exactly the same one back. That looks quite good. And the cylinders are looking quite good. I've got to make sure I don't get too much dirt in it, but they feel quite nice. They don't feel like scratched at all. Some small scratches here, but not too much. A little bit there, but then again, it's an old engine. And I could even remove the sleeves basically and put no sleeves in. Oh, we just need to clean it up now, and then we'll put the new gasket on. And once we get the new head, we put the head on. Okay guys, we're all done, and keep watching my next video where we put it all back together. I'll checked it out already on the internet, and I can get all the parts for about 800 euros, so it's worthwhile the effort, I think. And we'll put a new radiator up, a new pump house, a new water pump, a new thermostat house, then we have a new head that goes on top of it, the cylinder head that is. I have already new injectors laying on my shelf, so that wasn't too expensive either. So we'll put new injectors in and we adjust the valves, we put new oil in, and then this machine should be ready to go again for another 50 years. Thank you for viewing and keep watching the Massey Ferguson rebuild.